As soon as it's termed conversion therapy, the argument's already over. And you don't even notice that you just subordinated the highest value in the hierarchy of values to diversity. You lose, buddy.
Welcome to this episode of the Evangelical Times podcast. Today, what I want to do is to react to some comments made by a man called Jordan Peterson to the topic of whether the UK should ban conversion therapy. Now, for those of you who don't know, Jordan Peterson is a clinical psychologist from Canada. He's a YouTuber, he's an international speaker, he's an author, and he's a robust defender of free speech. And he's followed by a lot of people online. So when he speaks about an issue, lots of people are listening to what he has to say. And if you're unfamiliar with the ban on conversion therapy, well, here in the UK and indeed in many Western nations, there's a push by LGBT campaigners to introduce what's called a ban on conversion therapy. And what they mean by that is it should become a criminal offence, that you will be committing a crime if you seek to persuade someone to change their sexual orientation or their gender identity. But that brings with it all sorts of problems with freedom of speech, particularly religious liberty. Let's dive in and see what Jordan Peterson has to say.
Well, the first thing I would say about that is that as soon as it's termed conversion therapy, the argument's already over, right? Because this is one of the things, conservative politicians are particularly bad at this, by the way. That's why I mentioned at the beginning that you should never discuss viewpoint diversity. I mean, you think about what you're doing when you discuss viewpoint diversity. You think, you're conservative, let's say, that you've just pulled a fast one on the lefties. It's like you're so, gung-ho about diversity. What about viewpoint diversity? And you don't even notice that you just subordinated the highest value in the hierarchy of values to diversity. You lose, buddy. Doesn't matter what argument you make after you've done that. It's like, I define the terms of the debate. I established the questions. You seeded the terminological ground. You can flap your lips all night, but you're not going to change that. And so the conversion therapy issue right there is the way, as soon as that's framed in that manner, it's a lost cause.
The language of the debate matters. And of course, he's absolutely correct about that. We shouldn't allow one side of the debate to frame the discussion and frame the debate, because if you allow them to do that, then they have already essentially won. But where I would disagree with Jordan Peterson is that very often, we just don't have the luxury of framing the debate. I mean, if we did have that luxury, then we would say that the LGBT campaigners who are pushing for this ban are really pushing for their own blasphemy law. That they want to make it a criminal offence for anyone to sit down with anyone else and to seek to have a discussion with them or persuade them of a different point of view. Well, that in effect is an LGBT blasphemy law. But we don't have the luxury of framing the debate in those terms, because the mainstream media, all the major political parties, the government are all happy to call this a ban on conversion therapy. But, in actual fact, I also think that in calling it conversion therapy, I think the other side may have scored a bit of an own goal in this, because the idea of conversion and of Christian conversion lies at the heart of the gospel and at the heart of Christianity. So when others come along and say that they want to ban conversion therapy, it sounds very much to those of us on this side of the debate that they are seeking to make it a criminal offence for us to engage in a key element of our faith, which is to share the gospel with people and for people to be converted.
I had a client, a young man, who was being pressured quite intensely into a homosexual relationship by someone who was attracted to him. And he was genuinely confused about his sexuality and certainly about how to respond. Well, I wasn't going to do conversion therapy.
Jordan Peterson is clearly answering this question as a clinical therapist. He's thinking about how he would deal with it as a clinical therapist. My concern and the concern of other evangelicals is how this may impact churches, how it might impact preaching or praying or Bible studies or even parenting in line with your religious beliefs.
I mean, I don't know what's up with this kid. I have no idea, and neither did he. And so the goal there is if someone comes to you who's confused about their sexuality, and like, have you met someone who isn't confused about their sexuality? It's really complicated, especially when you're 16, you know. Well, you listen and you try to sort them out. And if you have any sense, you realize that you have enough trouble with your own destiny to not bother imposing your viewpoint, moral or otherwise, on this teenager.
Nobody is in the business of trying to force anyone to do anything. Coercive practices are already well covered by UK law. Anyone that's engaging in coercive practices to try and force someone to live a life they don't want to live can already be criminalised under any number of UK laws. So that's already covered. Our concern is that by introducing a special legislation in this area, you're just going to create mischief with freedom of speech. You're going to interfere with freedom of expression and with religious liberty. And it's really going to limit the ability of churches to preach and to pray and to pastor people and even for parents to give advice to their children over this issue. So yes, of course, no one's suggesting you can force anyone to do anything. That's already well covered by UK law. But in terms of sitting down and having a discussion with someone and seeking to persuade them of your point of view, I don't think the criminal law should be anywhere near that.
There's a fair bit of fluidity in human sexuality, and people have to come to terms with that. You know, you might say as a rule of thumb, and I think this is true, your life is going to be a lot simpler if you adopt something approximating traditional sexual roles. And so you step outside of that confine at your peril, but it might also be your necessity. Who's to say? So, and you help in humility, you help the person discover that for themselves. And so I think the talk of conversion therapy, you know, if someone's saying, well, I'll cure you of your homosexuality, it's like, well, it's not a disease, first of all, and so it doesn't need a cure, and probably you can't do that anyways, and it's not the proper way to advertise clinical services, let's say, because that isn't really how a clinical relationship works. So the argument, in some sense, is beside the point as far as I'm concerned.
Now here, Jordan Peterson is making the point that human sexuality can be incredibly fluid, which is to say, just because let's say a teenager says that they're gay or lesbian or says that they're transgender, just because they say that during their teenage years doesn't mean that that's going to be the case forever and a day. And for that reason, therefore, it seems ridiculous to make it a criminal offence to want to sit down with someone, particularly a young person, and have a discussion with them and try and persuade them of an alternative way of looking at these issues. And so, you know, I think Jordan Peterson's right when he highlights that as an issue. Well, if you would like to know more about this whole debate surrounding conversion therapy, there are lots of really useful articles on the Evangelical Times website. So just head on over to evangelical-times.org. That's evangelical-times.org and search for conversion therapy, and you'll find lots of helpful material.